Imagine you're driving home late at night. The roads are empty, the radio is low, and you're maybe 5 minutes from your front door. Then you see it, flashing lights in your rearview mirror. You pull over, hands at 10 and 2, heart starting to pound. The officer gets out of the patrol car, walks up to your window, and then just stands there, silent. No greeting, no explanation, no, do you know why I stopped you? Just nothing. It feels strange, unsettling, maybe even deliberate. And you're right to feel that way, because when a police officer stays silent during a traffic stop, it is almost never random. In fact, that silence might be one of the most calculated, psychologically powerful tools in law enforcement's entire playbook. Have you ever wondered why some officers talk your ear off while others just stand there watching you sweat? What you're about to learn might change how you see every single traffic stop from now on, because that silence isn't a blank space. It is a tool, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how it works, why officers use it, and most importantly, what it means for you. Stick with me. Most people believe that if you're pulled over and you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Just be polite, answer the questions, and you'll be on your way. But here's where it gets strange. That assumption that cooperation equals freedom is exactly what police silence exploits. Because when an officer refuses to speak, your brain starts doing something it wasn't designed to handle. It starts filling in the gaps. And what it fills those gaps with is almost never good. Let's rewind. You've been pulled over. The officer approaches your window. Instead of saying license and registration, they just stand there. 3 seconds pass, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. To you, that 10 seconds feels like an hour. Your mind races. Did I run that yellow light? Is my registration expired? Did someone report my car? Did they see me reach for my phone? Your heart rate spikes. Your breathing changes. You start talking, not because you have to, but because the silence is unbearable. And that right there is the entire point. Almost nobody talks about this part of a traffic stop, but police academies across the United States and the United Kingdom actually train officers to use what's called the silent approach. It's not an accident. It's not the officer being rude or distracted. It is a deliberate psychological technique designed to make you nervous, to make you feel like you're already in trouble, and to get you to say things you would never say if the officer was friendly and chatty. Think about that for a second. The silence isn't a lack of strategy. It is the strategy. This changes everything, doesn't it? Because now you're not just sitting in your car wondering why the officer won't talk. You're realizing that the officer is actively trying to make you uncomfortable. And before you think that sounds paranoid, let's look at what actual court cases and law enforcement training manuals have revealed. In the United States, the Supreme Court case Berkmer v. McCarty established that traffic stops are considered seizures under the Fourth Amendment, but they're also inherently stressful. Officers are trained to understand that stress. They're trained to manage it, and sometimes to increase it strategically. In the UK, while police procedure is different under the Road Traffic Act 1988 and PACE, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the psychological principle remains the same. Silence creates a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. And so do nervous drivers. So what do most people do when an officer stands there silently? They start offering information. I know I was going a little over back there. My friend borrowed the car last week. I'm not sure if everything's okay with the tags. I had a drink at dinner, but that was hours ago. Every single word you say can and will be used, not because the officer is evil, but because that's how the job works. Silence is their invitation for you to build your own case against yourself. But here's the part that almost no YouTube video talks about. The silent approach isn't just about getting you to talk. It's about testing you. Right now, somewhere in the back of your mind, you might be thinking, oh, well, I'd just stay quiet too. I wouldn't give in to the pressure. And maybe you wouldn't. But here's what you're missing. The officer is also watching your body language, your eye movements, your hands, your breathing. They're looking for signs of deception or nervousness that go beyond normal traffic stop anxiety. And because they haven't said a word, any nervous behavior you exhibit becomes, in their mind, completely voluntary. You can't blame the officer for intimidating you. They just stood there. The silence creates a perfect legal shield. Then something unexpected happens. The officer finally speaks. But they don't ask why you were speeding or why your brake light is out. They ask a completely different question. Where are you coming from tonight? Or, is there any reason I shouldn't be concerned about what's in your vehicle? These are not random questions. They are what law enforcement calls pretextual or behavioral questions. And they only work because of the silence that came before. The silence lowered your guard. It made you desperate to prove you're a good person, a cooperative citizen. And now when the officer asks something that seems casual, you're far more likely to answer honestly, or more dangerously, to overshare. Let me give you a real-world example. In 2019, a driver in Texas was pulled over for a minor lane violation. Body camera footage shows the officer approaching the vehicle and then standing completely silent for 18 seconds. The driver immediately starts talking. "I'm sorry if I swerved. I was reaching for my water bottle. I'm just tired. I've been driving for 6 hours. I'm heading to my mom's house. She's not doing well." The officer still hasn't asked a single question. By the time the officer finally says license and registration, the driver has already admitted to fatigue, a potential medical emergency distraction, and a destination that might explain erratic driving. None of that was required. All of it was volunteered, and all of it was created by a simple, powerful legal tool: silence. This is why retention matters, because if you stopped watching right now, you'd miss the most important part. The silence rule doesn't just apply to what you say, it applies to what the officer doesn't say about your rights. In the United States, police are not required to tell you that you're free to leave unless you are under arrest or have been detained for an unreasonable amount of time. That means during a routine traffic stop, the officer can stand there silently for several minutes, and you are legally required to stay. You cannot drive away. You cannot demand an explanation. The law says the stop is a seizure, and you have to endure it. But here's the twist. The officer also doesn't have to tell you that you have the right to remain silent during the stop itself. That right, the famous Miranda warning, only applies to custodial interrogation, which typically means after you've been arrested. Before that, during the traffic stop, anything you say is voluntary, and silence from the officer makes that voluntary label much easier to defend in court. Think about the psychological weight of that. You are trapped in your car. An armed officer is standing at your window saying nothing. You are legally required to stay. You are not required to talk, but nobody told you that. And the silence is screaming at you to fill it. That is not random. That is not a coincidence. That is a system. But the story gets even deeper. Because what we're really talking about here is power. And power, when unevenly distributed, creates fear. The silent traffic stop is felt differently depending on who you are, where you live, and what you look like. Data from both the US and the UK shows that drivers from minority communities experience higher rates of being asked to exit their vehicles, higher rates of searches, and higher rates of what feels like intentional intimidation during stops. When you add deliberate police silence to that dynamic, the psychological impact multiplies. A white driver in a suburban neighborhood might feel annoyed by the silence. A black driver in a predominantly white town might feel terrified. That's not an opinion. That's what decades of research on implicit bias in policing have documented. The silence doesn't just extract information, it reinforces imbalance. So what do you do with this information? Because knowing that police silence is a tactic is one thing. Knowing how to respond is everything. Here's the answer that almost nobody gives you. You do not have to fill the silence. You are legally allowed to remain quiet during a traffic stop, even before you're arrested. You can sit there, hands visible on the steering wheel, and wait for the officer to speak first. You can answer questions selectively or not at all. You can say, "Officer, I'm happy to provide my license and registration, but I don't answer questions." That is not resisting. That is not obstruction. That is your right under the Fifth Amendment in the US and under the right to remain silent in the UK's Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. But most people don't know that. Most people think refusing to answer will make things worse. And sometimes in the moment it might feel that way. But legally, silence is not a crime. Your silence, not theirs. And then something even more important. If the officer's silence feels excessive, if minutes are passing without explanation, you can ask a single question. "Officer, am I free to leave?" That question changes everything. Because if you are free to leave, they have to say yes. And if you're not free to leave, they have to have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to continue detaining you. That small question, calmly asked, breaks the silence loop. It forces the officer to clarify the nature of the stop. And in many cases, that's when you'll see the biggest shift in their behavior. The silence only works if you're too afraid to break it. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where the officer just stood there without speaking? How did it feel? Did you start talking just to break the tension? A lot of people have. Drop your experience in the comments. Don't worry, you can stay anonymous. I want to know if this has happened to you because the data says it happens far more often than people admit. Now let's escalate because the silent treatment isn't just a traffic stop trick. It appears in other police encounters too. Doorstep interviews, witness interviews, even during police stops on the street. The principle is the same. Silence creates discomfort. Discomfort creates speech. Speech creates evidence. And here is the major twist that changes everything you thought you knew. In some cases, police silence has been ruled legally dangerous. For them, not for you. In the US case, Salinas versus Texas, the Supreme Court ruled that if you're not in custody and you haven't been read your rights. Remaining silent can actually be used against you if you selectively answer questions. That's a shocking reversal, isn't it? The court said that if you start talking and then go silent on a specific question, that silence can be treated as suspicious. But if you remain completely silent from the beginning, that cannot be used as evidence of guilt. The difference matters. And it matters because police know this. The officer standing silently at your window is also watching to see if you'll talk, then stop, then talk again. That pattern creates legal room for them to argue that your partial silence suggests consciousness of guilt. Almost nobody talks about this nuance, but it's critical. Because it means the strategy isn't just to make you talk, it's to make you talk inconsistently. The silence becomes a trap within a trap. So what does a smart, informed person do? The same thing that legal scholars and criminal defense attorneys recommend. You stay calm, you keep your hands visible, you provide your license, registration, and insurance when asked. And then you politely, respectfully say nothing else until you are told you're free to leave. If the officer asks questions, you can say, "I don't answer questions, officer." If they press, you repeat it. You do not explain why. You do not argue. You do not get emotional. You become the silence. And then you wait. Because here's the final piece of this puzzle that most people will never tell you. Police silence only works if you believe you owe them an explanation. You don't. The law does not require you to help the police investigate you. It does not require you to make their job easier. It requires you to comply with lawful orders, like stepping out of the car if told or providing identification, but it does not require you to fill awkward silences with self-incriminating chatter. That is not being uncooperative, that is being smart. And the difference between cooperation and self-destruction is often just a few seconds of knowing your rights. By now, you've probably realized that the quiet officer at your window isn't being mysterious. They aren't distracted or rude. They are executing a tactic, and that tactic has a name. In law enforcement training, it's sometimes called the pause. In psychological terms, it's an applied pressure technique. In practice, it's one of the most effective, low-risk ways to turn a routine stop into an opportunity for discovery. And the only reason it works is because we've been taught that silence between people is a problem to be solved. The officer counts on that impulse. They're banking on your discomfort. They're waiting for you to crack. And when you do, they write it down, record it, and hand it to a prosecutor who will say to a jury, "The defendant volunteered this information freely, but not today, not after this video, because now you see it." That silence was never random. It was never a coincidence. It was a key, turning a lock you didn't even know existed. And the question isn't whether police will use it. They will. The question is whether you'll recognize it for what it is, a test, one you don't have to pass, one you don't even have to take. So the next time those lights appear in your rearview mirror, remember this: you are not required to perform. You're not required to explain. You are required to be safe, to be calm, and to know that silence cuts both ways. They can stand there as long as they want. You can sit there just as long. And the moment you realize that you have nothing to prove, nothing to fix, and nothing to fill, that silence becomes yours. If this changed how you see traffic stops, share it with someone who drives. And before you go, tell me in the comments, honestly, have you ever started talking just because a cop was quiet? You're not alone. Let's talk about it.